Hello, this is Horst Feldhaeuser. I'm Group Services Director at Infotools in New Zealand. And today we're talking to you about nothing but the truth. No fake news in this presentation, or how Coca-Cola created the one source of truth, all time, every time. Now, we all probably heard of fake news by now. And hopefully only few of you on the webinar believe in fake news. But how many know for sure whether some news that we hear are real or fake? That's much harder, right? And it's even harder when the truth is determined by a set of rules to get the correct numbers, or the numbers that we believe are calculated in the correct way. So for Coca-Cola, this means, for example, having the exact same way of calculating their brand and consumption measures all the time and every time, across something like 300 plus brands and 100 plus markets. Now, winning the hearts and minds of consumers is critical to the ongoing success and growth of the Coca-Cola company as a total beverage company, providing beverages for life to consumers around the world. As such, significant resources are invested in tracking and measuring the success of its brands amongst consumers in all markets in which it operates. Now, this here is an internal Coca-Cola diagram that they're happy to share with us today. We're not going to go into its full detail, but it shows the numerous touch points from marketing to bottlers, via the transporting to point of sale, and ultimately to the shopper and consumer. The plan for Coca-Cola is to manage all available key information in that journey in the same way so they can drive the superior consumer, shopper, and behavior understanding. Delivering an integrated view of Coca-Cola's whole business across its entire system and providing a holistic and predictive people understanding by leveraging behavioral, social, passive, and survey data in a cheaper, faster way is really the holy grail for Coca-Cola. Now, this has resulted in a shift in strategy, a refocusing of resources, so to speak, and working in new ways to unlock growth, leveraging technology and recognizing the rapid changes taking place in the world amongst consumers, retailers, and the environment in general in which it operates. So the guiding principles for what Coca-Cola is calling the Coca-Cola ready-to-drink lake is the ability to ingest and store a variety of data arriving at various velocities and at various points of the journey and not being limited by any volume. Also being able to auto scale and across different ecosystems, components, and services. Supporting automation and enabling the data governance to understand and making sure that at any time of this journey, we're looking at the same thing. Having the data available in what they call the data lake, however, is only the first piece of the puzzle. But we also need to have an efficient way to get the information out and make it useful for the business. And here I wanted to give you a very short story that I had talked to one of our stakeholders in the global team. And in Atlanta, they spoke to the IT guys who were helping with setting up those data lakes and getting all the information from the different parties, from the third party or internal or bottling partners into the data lake. And she asked him, so, once in the data lake, what are we going to do with it? And he said, well, it's there for you. It's there for you to use. And she said, okay, she's an insights director, so she knows what she's talking about. And she said, well, yeah, what are we going to do with it? Well, it's there. Okay, so how do I get it out? Well, it's there for you. So this is really, I think, one of the challenges that we all face in our industry. We all talk about getting this information together, getting it into the data lake, but what are we going to do with it next? And how does this have an impact on the business? Now, to bring it back a little bit, I want to focus on what our friends in the Global Decision Science and Analytics team, the GDSA, what they're looking at. That's basically the Global Insights and Strategy team. They're looking at something like 300 plus brands. Their tracker's running across 100 plus countries where they're using something like 75 plus agencies. And they have about more than 10 global market research protocols, from their brand guidance system, which is their ongoing market tracker, to what they call the CBL, the Consumer Beverage Landscape, which is like a UNA study, but they also have shopper and more sophisticated trackers in each of those markets. So for them, it's really is to have everything in one view and provide the critical information to inform the strategy and tactics that then the marketing team, and the brand teams are looking for. So if we keep focusing on the data and insights for a moment, as this is the one that they can influence the most, yes, creating a single integrated system across the entire cycle of brands is really important. And that includes the testing, the evaluation, the live conversations, and whether that's a research tracking or digital and social studies, whether it's comms and mixed media measuring studies, or how they look at the executional data, and also the big data that they have in terms of their research and insights. Now, most of you on the call would probably agree with the statement when I say not all data sources are equal. And by that we mean that survey data has a much higher complexity than any other data that's out there. Yes, if you look at SKUs and if you look at your sales data or your media data, that can be, cut down in very small pockets. But with market research data, we know it's not straightforward. From explicit survey routing to complex KPI constructions, Coca-Cola draws insights from specific ways of looking at data. And this cannot be compromised in a one-solution-fits-all analytical engine. They often need specialist survey software solutions that allows them to dive deep into these data and look at the specific ways, looking at differences, looking at low sample sizes when they occur, and being really able to drill into this data. We're also looking at survey data harmonization from one source, which we believe is keys when looking across different data sets and or different surveys. And even more so when we use 75 different and often competitive data suppliers, all that might be providing different labels in different markets, and we need one place that uses a universal code, universal labeling, and a universal formatting to bring it all together. We need to make sure that the survey data is easily accessible. And while we know that a data lake and analytical engine that is quite generic will allow users to look at aggregated data quite quickly, we also need to give access to those power users who really need to understand what's going on in this market research data environment. Above all, we in Coca-Cola believe that survey data quality and integrity is non-negotiable, no matter where the data comes from. As Coca-Cola's data custodian, we know that survey data quality can be compromised at any point between collection and analysis. And then as an independent partner, we keep Coca-Cola's data suppliers in check. And I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. So here's just a quick look of the data harmonization process that we're running internally from when we receive the agency data to when the data is transferred back to Coca-Cola and ready for them to share internally and also with their external consultants and providers. Obviously, we're starting at the point where we get the clean data source from the agencies. They're still responsible for excluding speeders and dirty data, and they give it to us. We then run that through what we call the Coca-Cola dictionary, the master code frame. And there's a lot to take into account. There is the different brand names which need to be globalized, so Coca-Cola can look at them across their 100 markets and then specifically across their top 40 markets. We have, Coke Zero as a classic example. It's now called Coke Zero No Sugar. or zero sugar. It's called sin azúcar in other markets, and it needs to be aligned. And we even have markets where they're still looking at both brands, the Coke Zero and the Coke Zero Sugar. And again, this needs to be aligned. We have automations in the background looking at these files and bringing them together in the master code frame to do the harmonization and also the constructions and the labeling. One of the big constructions for Coca-Cola, for example, is what they call their brand love score. And while there's a global guideline for it, it's really hard to understand how exactly it's going to be calculated, and there's formulas for it. And we had numerous times where we have different markets coming to us and saying, hey, tell us how this is actually calculated, because our agencies come up with a different way. And it really needs to be the same way every single time, whether you look at data from the US, from the UK, from Iraq or Iran, from Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere in Africa or Asia Pac. We apply some sampling and weighting rules, and we run this through the quality control and then bring the data back to the Coca-Cola teams. Now, we've been doing this in one way or another since 2001, so almost 20 years, where we've been working with the internal and external stakeholders who use the same database based on the same data processing and harmonization rules, truly one source of truth for those over 100 markets. And since 2006, we have what we call the protocol custodian, and we actually presented it in one of Ray's NewMR webinars as well, and talking about the learnings that we took in there, which really helps the agencies to follow those global protocols if they make changes, to make sure that these changes don't affect the calculations or the results in a way that they can never negatively impact. And then we feed this back to Coca-Cola, and this is where the fun part begins. So since the early days, we provide Coca-Cola with what we call the Coca-Cola Vision, which is basically an analytics tool branded for Coca-Cola, which gives them access to their databases. But more and more, they needed it for other reporting options as well. And since 2009, we're working with them to allow them to use that information and use that data in different ways. We started off in Europe and then worked our way through the global team, first in 2015 with the T32, the top 32 markets. And then last year, actually 2 years ago, the expansion to what they call the T40 markets. And we added the Latin markets this year. And next year is going to be really the big one, where we want to incorporate all of this in this data lake and this holistic people understanding engine. Now, these are the different options that we transfer the data back to the Coca-Cola and their agencies and their teams, and what they're going to be using them for. So I mentioned before what we call CCV, the Coca-Cola Vision, which is a data analysis and data reporting tool. We also have what's called now CCV Harmony, which is our cloud-based solution based on Infotools Harmony. And that goes out to all of the markets. So they all have access to the data, to their own data. Global has access, obviously, to all of the 100+ markets. And they can run their own analysis and feed their own reporting from that. But we also give them this data in a slightly different way through an API and their Azure blob storage server, and also sometimes in SPSS files to feed their internal and external reporting. So Coca-Cola internally has two major reports that they're using. One is called the Compass reports. That brings all the market research data and some other additional data like social media, like sales data in for each of the markets, in particular for global as well. They then have the fact books that concentrate mainly on a number of brands and give a lot of information in those. But they're also sharing this information, this data, with the global and local agencies. And they're working with a number of agencies and consulting agencies globally and also locally. And just to name a few, the WNSs and the Brandscapes and the Candace and the Ipsos of the world. And we have a consulting team based in LATAM as well called Infotools Plus. This data is also feeding the global dashboards. So for the BGS, the brand guidance system, there is a global dashboard by AQ that the markets have access to, that again gives them a different way of looking at the data. We also have a number of markets that are working with Infotools to have a slightly different view of that data as well. And then they have what they call the analytical library, where again, they can look at all the information that comes in and that can be used and can be reused at any one time. Now, one of the big challenges for Coca-Cola when you work across 100+ markets is being ahead of the time and really being on call with the way that they're looking at the data collection and also the way how they report things internally. And there's a continuous review going on, driven by the global team, but also with input from some of the bigger markets like Europe, Asia Pac, and LATAM, and of course the US team as well, in ways of how can we better get the information that we collect in the markets, how can that be even better and even closer to reality? And there's a number of questions that need to be answered. Does the existing suite of tools still remain and meet the changing demands? Are there critical business questions that are best served with the current system, or do we need to look at different systems? And one of the big challenges is, and has always been and still is what we call the incidence and consumption measure. How can we get closer to the point of truth where we really find out what people are telling us, or how we can measure it through maybe mobile consumption trackers or otherwise on what they consume and what they buy, and how does that then match with the sales data that we get from other sources. So really, does our existing suite of tools and protocols leverage the advancements in technologies as much as we wanted, whether that's mobile, whether it's social media, or any other ways of doing it? So 2019, we're right in it, and that's actually going to be a big year for Coca-Cola, and looking at a number of different pilot studies. They're already underway in terms of, in particular, incidence and consumption. Are we still looking at equity in the right way? Are we still measuring the right metrics for equity? What about full brand tracking? We have a number of markets who are really interested in the full brand tracking in terms of what does it mean for my brand, and what's the perception out there in the brand, and how is the brand doing? And then mobile. Mobile is, of course, massive in a number of markets, and we're already piloting a number of tracking that just uses mobile. But then you go into other markets like Africa, where you still have people going face to face with tablets, and we need to bring that information together. We need to make sure that a tracking study or a consumption study that is in one part of the world, maybe a mobile, in another part of the world might be face to face with tablets, that they are compatible, because that's what happened at Coke. They might get a call from their CEO or their CMO one morning and say, tell me how my brands compare across the top 40 markets. And the team in global, they need to go into their tools and find that information. And they do at the moment, but they can only do it because they have one source of data, and it's all harmonized in the same way. Coming back to that idea of the data lake and the analytical engine, the holistic people understanding engine. So for us, the next step is really bringing all the survey data together across the different provider, across the different methodologies, across the different protocols, using our solution Infotools Harmony, which is called CCV Harmony for Coca-Cola, making sure that these complex studies are loaded by us in the same way across every single market, and no matter what methodology they're using, allowing Coca-Cola a bit of self-serve as well, and bringing extra data into it. In that way, ensuring that all of the survey data goes through the same data quality check, the same integrity, and the same harmonization checks, and really bringing that, again, as we said before, that one source of truth for survey data in. let's do the heavy lifting on one side and then bring it back into the data lake. And then at the same time, look at the other data sources that we have, sales and trends and social media and media data, and bring them together as well, whether that's through Harmony or whether it's through the analytical engine, and then allow people to access the information at whatever level they are comfortable. So for the market research and insight specialists, they will access this information through our Harmony database or Harmony platform. For some of the other managers, they might just look at aggregated data and look at this in the holistic people understanding engine. This is another slide from Coca-Cola that they're happy for us to share. And again, it just highlights the vision of this driving the growth and driving the future through this analytical engine. So we're looking at driving sustained industry-leading growth by embedding a holistic data and algorithm-driven approach that leads to better business decisions, that identifies growth opportunities, and that acts as a growth catalyst. And within this, we need to look at the different ways of how things are done. So we want to look at, obviously, the consumer and the consumer-centric brands and what's driving that. Where is natural going? Where is sugar-free going? We want to look at the different shopping patterns. One of the big changes for Coca-Cola, and probably a lot of brands that sell through automates, and where you is the decline to some extent of shopping malls. So buying a Coca-Cola can out of an automation, that's clearly changing and has been changing over the last 5 to 10 years, and it will change more and more with people buying more and more online, and the ever-changing environment. We want to look at the distribution. As I say, we want to look at the shared values and how the different brands can have an impact in delivering profit growth for the different markets, and how that then follows through again to free up more money, time, and focus and engagement on the next level with those different brands in the different markets. So to wrap it up, really, we want to highlight 3 different points. And in our many years of working with global trackers, in particular in the 18 years we've been working with Coca-Cola, we've seen how important it is to have one single source of data truth. The worst thing that could happen is if someone reports a KPI metric one way and then someone else reports it in a different way, and then they pick up and see different results, and then there's mistrust into the data, into the quality of the data, into how to use that data internally. So that's really, really the big one for us, is that there's one source of data, and that's the same way every time they look at it, whether it's a study from New Zealand or whether it's a study from the US or from the UK or from Thailand or Malaysia or anywhere else in the world. We talked a little bit about it, but yes, we believe that market research survey data is extremely complex. And with the technology advancements and the need for shorter, more modular surveys conducted on different platforms, we believe this will only get more complex. Just imagine comparing a 5-minute mobile consumption study in one country, and then in the other country you have a 20-minute face-to-face survey, and they have similar questions in terms of your consumption, but also in terms of your brand equity. They need to be brought together. But also think about complex routing. We're now having really complex studies that make them shorter because we skip different parts of the survey, or we go to different parts of the survey quicker. Again, it needs to be brought together. We need to bridge different data sources. We need to looking into longitudinal surveys. We believe that a generic business reporting platform is not built for that, and therefore it needs a specialized market research platform that then can feed into that business reporting platform. So really, the recommendation from us to Coca-Cola and what we're working on certainly over the last few years and more so is to integrate similar data sources into specialized platforms first, and then combine these into the overall insights engine, or how Coca-Cola calls it, the holistic people understanding analytical engine. That's a mouthful. I'm not sure whether there's an easier way to call it, but that's really what they wanted, is a one-stop shop for all of their teams, and then with the opportunity for specialists to dive in deeper into their specialist platforms. And on that note, that's our story, where and how Coca-Cola created one source of truth all the time, every day, every time. There's no fake news in here, and I'm more than happy to answer questions now. So thank you. Ray, back to you.
We hope that you enjoyed that NewMR webinar and ideally found it both interesting and useful. We love producing all of these webinars for the research and the insights industry, but it does cost money. We have licensors, we have editing, we have tech team, and so on to provide for. And almost all of that cost is met by the NewMR sponsors. So we'd like to give a really big thank you to all of these people you see here on the page, the people who make it possible for us to bring all of these webinars and the blogs and all the rest of it to you. You can say thank you to these people too by visiting their website or asking for a quote the next time you're looking for one of their services. And when you do, please do mention that you saw that they were sponsors of NewMR. That will help give them the confidence to continue being sponsors of NewMR and its services, webinars, blogs, and so on. You could also become a sponsor of NewMR if you wanted. If you would like to find out about the sorts of packages we have, please contact us. And you can find out more about what we do and how to contact us at the newmr.org website.